All right, so on the weekend of January 10th, after the murder of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis, there were over 1,000 nationwide ICE out protests that drew hundreds of thousands of concerned American citizens into the streets to exercise their First Amendment rights. And I'm referencing this because my family and I were driving by one, and it was, the largest protest I'd seen to date in my little corner of Silicon Valley, like in a largely blue area in an overall blue state with some big red swaths after the No Kings protests, which happened in the summer and the fall of 2025. So as we passed this intersection, which was outside of this like large outdoor mall where protesters were gathered on all four corners of the intersection, you could hear all of the horns blaring in support. And we were definitely leaning on ours while we were yelling and waving. Everyone's waving signs, they're yelling, it's horns, like cacophony of just sound. And then my oldest son is yelling from the back seat, "Love democracy," as loud as he could, because we were talking about like, this is democracy in action. This is people exercising their voice. And really in that moment, it felt like everyone's voice was being heard and everyone's voice mattered in that moment. And really, that is democracy at its best, if we're going to make an argument for what is the ultimate form of democracy. So that was what was happening where we were. But at the same time, same weekend, elsewhere in this country, there were horns and cars and yelling for a very different reason. Because in that same weekend, a video circulated showing ICE agents smashing car windows in Minneapolis and literally grabbing people out of cars while horns were blaring, not in support, but in protest, and neighbors were yelling and screaming. And it's hard to imagine, off the top of my head, that you've got a warrant for all of these random car grabs, right? Like every car that passes by, you've got this warrant. So maybe in contrast to that first scenario that I was talking about, democracy in action, right? The second one, this is fascism in action, authoritarian rule in action, and kind of the secret police working just as they were designed to do. So Sarah, hearing both of these situations, right, sort of juxtaposed on each other, let me ask you this. Which one sounds like the America you know?
In this day in 2026, would say that both of these are the America that we now know.
Mm.
It's sad, right? Like right. There's the ideal version, and then there's the horrifying version of what we don't want it to be. Like these are the headlines that you would read about a different country in a different part where we would criticize and feel badly for those who live under those sorts of circumstances. And in some ways, actually, if you take a step back and I think about what international friends are saying and what the international commentary is about this horror of the headlines that they see, like, that's what other countries are doing to us now. What we used to say about the horror of living under these circumstances in other countries, people are saying about America now.
Yeah. I mean, and that's devastating, right? It should be devastating hearing that. So maybe the better question is this then. If both of those are the America that we know today, which one sounds like the America you want to live in or the America that you want to be fighting for?
100% your first scenario, democracy and everything that our founding fathers, maybe not everything that our founding fathers stood for, but a lot that our founding fathers stood for and envisioned: to not have a king, to not have authoritarianism, to not, to basically give the right of heading the direction of our country to the people, right? I feel like regardless of what you, dear listener, answered, this episode is a must listen. We're going to be unpacking the history of ICE, and it's not a long one, despite what might be suggested by our current administration. We're going to also talk about why ICE is acting like the secret police for the administration and how that's not only incredibly illegal today, but also, reminds us of another secret police, which rhymes with Schmestapo, and what we can all do about ICE in our communities. And that's really, I hope you listen through to that point, because it feels sometimes like we have no agency, like there's nothing we can do, but there are things we can do. And we're going to talk about physical and sort of virtual ideas for things that you can do that'll make a difference. So please listen on and share this episode. Welcome to What Do You Mean by That? We're your co-hosts, Sarah and me, Sasha.
Okay, so in a first, I think in our like almost 7 years of podcasting, we have to kick this episode off and an episode about ice off with what might be the most cringeworthy New Year's Eve moment ever. And so this is going to take us back, a couple of weeks to New Year's Eve 2025. And why I said this is a first on the podcast is because I've never before like made you watch a clip and like, tell me your feelings real time. Because normally this is the stuff that we text each other, but like I saved this one special for you. So you may have seen it. I hope you have.
I have not. I don't think so.
And I know I'm sometimes prone to embellishment, but this is indeed like peak cringe, as the kids say, right? So I need you to watch this clip. It's really short. It's like 20 seconds. And tell us what you see, like House Hunter style, like you're moving through the room, right? You're dictating.
This is the kitchen. This is the balcony.
Right. It's not going to be that. I bet you're going to wish it was. Okay. And tell us what you see and what's happening in the clip.
Here we go, folks. Here goes. Oh, no. I see the title. Mar-a-Lago, Florida. Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller dance at the New Year's Eve party. Ice, ice, baby. Are you kidding me right now?
What are they doing, Sarah?
They're dancing and talking. Ice, ice, baby. Who's in the house? It is like a glorious ballroom. They're like, oh, I'm going to just pause this right now. Please stop this horror. Wow, you guys. Okay.
How does that make you feel?
Like, where was that share? That was on YouTube that I just watched that clip. These are like major governmental leaders dancing at a New Year's Eve party, which, if it's like I don't know, it was not.
It was a billionaire's party, to be clear, right? Mar-a-Lago. There's chandeliers, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
So disconnected from reality.
Right. But what is the song that they're dancing to?
Ice, ice,
and
baby.
Lip-syncing to. Yeah.
Do you remember that song? Ice, ice, like the Vanilla Ice song.
But obviously, it's not.
There's different meanings to that nowadays. And
so Kristi Noem lip syncing to Ice, Ice, Baby. How does that make you feel? I feel like a therapist, like a Trump administration therapist.
I'm taken back to the conversation with Dr. Bill Doherty on how to have difficult conversations that we did on the show. It makes me feel like. Am I allowed to swear on our podcast?
I think it's our podcast. So
it's fucking horrifying. Like, are you kidding me right now that the callousness for an organization that is killing people and I feel like they would blow this off like it's just a song that was being played. It's not serious. Like they would see no deeper meaning in it, or they would not allow for there to be any deeper meaning in it. But it feels so on brand with this administration's dog whistling and like not saying the hate in order to not be able to be held accountable, right? Like no one goes around being like, hey, I'm racist. Like you don't do that. You just create different policies. I feel like that is a very similar scenario where they're going to try to blame innocence, but after act and after act after act of horror, terror, death, like it feels incredibly freaking callous to be making light of this right now. And also, Happy New Year.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on the head. I think what this underscores for me is this is kind of like a game, right? Like this is a game to the administration. Like you can make light of people dying, right? A game that has actually resulted in 32 people dying in ICE custody last year, 4 dying incredibly violently. And you're deporting over 500,000 people. Like these are deportations of long-term U.S. residents in the United States under false pretenses. This is the removal of habeas corpus, which is a core principle for all of everyone who has said that they love the Constitution, right? This is our constitutional right to due process, which is being violated regularly. And because that means legally, we require a person who is under arrest, who is placed under arrest, to be brought before a judge or a court so they can hear the charges that are being leveled against them. We just kind of skip that step, right? Because that step allows you to secure someone's release unless you've got lawful grounds for arresting them in the first place, right? So the reason why you skip that step is you don't have lawful grounds, right? And it's just easier to make people disappear.
Yeah, in parlance, like you're disappearing people as opposed to actually doing this the right way.
Right. And well, and to your point earlier, right? This is what we see other countries do, and we talk about how terrible that is, right? How authoritarian, how fascist that is. And we're doing it here. And as we've seen, like, and, we started the episode with murders of innocent Americans, right? By what seems like a group of street thugs at times in blue jeans with bandanas over their faces, since they're too cowardly to do all of this with their faces out for everyone to see who they are. So, like, going back to the theory that this is a game, what's the purpose of the game, right? This is a game where the purpose is to terrorize us and to make sure we all stay in line, because that is what fascism requires: fear, order, and silence.
It really feels like this extension of when Trump first came into power this time. Everybody was just like, oh my gosh, it's chaos. Oh my God. Like, and the chaos was the point. Now the terror is the point. This is accelerating, not slowing down.
Yeah. So I think, like, what helps, because I'm really excited for us to get later into the episode where we talk about what we can do. But I think in order to get to what we can do, it's also important to really understand what ICE is. Because
wait. History? We're supposed to understand history so we don't repeat it? Oh, I've never heard that before.
This is a really wild concept. I know. And so also, what's super wild is that when researching something, and I would say in the past, researching something that is part of a federal government, I would first go to the federal government website to look at that. You can't do that anymore. Like, I searched and I found the website. I also saw the headlines relate. I was just like, no, we can't use any government website for
Which is terrifying. Like, this is the first time I think we've ever felt that. I keep wondering, like, have they felt that before? Like, literally on the whitehouse.gov website recently, we found that they said that the election had been stolen. Like, on the federal government site. It's like Wikipedia now.
Right. No, it's, how we did that whole episode about how Wikipedia, like, you can't rely on Wikipedia. Like, we're gonna have to retract all of that, like, and be like, you know what? That's it. That's what we got today, friends.
Yeah.
We've got Wikipedia and citizen journalism, like, independent media is all we've got. But so let's piece together, and I've got a lot of notes about this. I'm gonna go through it kind of quickly so that we don't get bogged down in all of, the pain, right, that goes along with discussing ICE. So ICE was formed after 9/11. And so when I say
that's 2001.
2001, right? And it wasn't actually formed in 2001. So there was an interview done on NPR by the general counsel for the INS, which was the Immigration and Naturalization Services. And that was sort of the precursor, right, to a lot of our immigration. Like, that was our precursor immigration agency. And so this guy was a general counsel under Presidents Clinton and Bush. And so he was talking about, like, how INS had kind of been doing immigration, and it was responsible for sort of everything, right, related to immigration. It was responsible for border security, interior enforcement, asylum, immigration benefits, all of the stuff that we see different sort of arms of Department of Homeland Security doing now. And so although, like, prior to 9/11, there was this whole internal view that INS was not up to the task of carrying out all these things. And so then when 9/11 happened, like, and Sarah, you and I were alive and adults during 9/11. So you remember there was like a gigantic national panic, right? Because this was the largest attack, largest mass killing of Americans on U.S. soil. And the terrorists had been inside the U.S., right? They had trained in the U.S. And so I think it was seen like this was a large scale failure, right? By, like, the kind of organizations and agencies that were designed to keep us safe. So in response to that national panic, and I think because everyone was like, well, what are we going to do now? President George W. Bush created the Office of Homeland Security in October 2001. And so the goal of that was really to develop and coordinate the implementation of a comprehensive national strategy to secure the United States from terrorist threats or attacks. So keep that in mind, because that whole theory is that ICE and the role of ICE and all of that was really sort of a counterterrorism effort, right? Like, it was designed to keep the U.S. safe. So right after that, the next year, 2002, Congress passed the Homeland Security Act, which sort of took all these other federal agencies that were kind of out there, and sort of INS as well, and sort of consolidated them all under the Department of Homeland Security, of which Kristi Noem, Ice Baby, is now the head of, right? So they basically in order to create ICE, they combined part of what used to be the U.S. Customs Service and part of U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. And ICE became sort of the investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security. So, according to a 2000 report, the stated role of ICE, or the primary mission of ICE, is to prevent acts of terrorism by targeting the people, money, and materials that support terrorist and criminal activities. So, if you think about like sort of what that really means, it's immigration enforcement, investigation of illegal movement of people and goods, and the prevention of terrorism. So under DHS, right, which is sort of the overarching thing, you have ICE. You also have Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, which is the group that's responsible for enforcing our borders, right? If you think about the US as a map, right? The Border Patrol is what is at our southern border, at our northern border. Those are the border checkpoints, right? And also, if you think about, as you go in and out of the country, right? That is also Customs and Border Patrol. And then you also have the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which handles our naturalization and citizenship process. So basically, you've got border control, you've got ICE, which operates domestically, and then you've got sort of the USCIS, which handles the people who become naturalized or US citizens. So ICE kind of straddles the line between public safety and national security, which kind of sounds a little bit like the police, but it's obviously different, right? I think we've seen that. And its agents have the power to stop, detain, and arrest people they suspect of being in the U.S. illegally. What is stated about ICE, too, is they can detain U.S. citizens in limited circumstances, such as if a person interferes with an arrest, assaults an officer, or ICE suspects the person of being in the U.S. illegally.
Ooh, that feels so fraught. That last part, suspects. Why?
Right.
And how is that not 100% prone to being abused based on like, oh, you look brown, I think you're here illegally, like preconceived notions of what immigrants look like in this country?
Well, this is a great question. And that's what the Supreme Court basically ruled on last year, where they were like, where we used to have guardrails exactly for that point, right? Because you raised a really good point. Like, why can't we just racially profile everyone? And we couldn't actually, because there were guardrails until, with the Roberts Court. And they're like, hey, you know what? Like, can't really do that. But hey, like, if you think they might be like illegal based on how they look, that's cool. Like so we are actively removing, and by we, I mean not we, the administration is actively removing guardrails around that, right? Because what is more important than unchecked power?
Nothing for this administration.
Right. And so, I just said that ICE was created post 9/11. And I think that, and I should note along the lines of like how you can't trust government websites, like a lot of this information came from this article called The Evolution of ICE from Counterterrorism to Nationalism, which is on this great site, Mainline, which is independent journalism. So a little bit of it came from Wikipedia, and from other sources. But anyway, ICE as a concept, there were precursors to it, right? And I think like we should also remember that this is not just a partisan construct, right? Yes, it happened in response to 9/11, the creation of ICE, but like in 1996, President Clinton had signed a law into effect called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. And so that criminalized undocumented immigration.
Criminalized in what sense? Because I feel like that's a misused term that we hear a lot, that they are criminals. I think it's not like a felony to come you are not a criminal. It's a civil infraction to be in this country illegally, unless you then get deported and come back, in which case it is a felony, from what I understand.
Yes. And I think this also created along the lines of like sentencing guidelines, and it created more of a structure around what undocumented immigrants would happen, especially because it also dealt with, and I think this is like sort of the overarching question of like, well, we have all these violent undocumented immigrants here, right? It was designed to deal with that, but it was also a way to really look at the question of undocumented immigrants in this country, not by saying they are necessarily criminals, but how do you deport people, right? Because the U.S. has always had, compared to other countries, like let's say in Northern Europe, right, a much different immigration policy. And so this was designed to put like sort of create a system in which you could effectively do this on a larger scale. Yeah. So going back to the Bush, like counterterrorism ICE, right? Like, so basically a lot of that focus was still like, because it was focused on counterterrorism, but it was also like trying to continue this concept of like, how do we remove undocumented immigrants from this country? And they have some like epic operation names, like, Operation Endgame was a 2003 deportation enforcement plan with the goal of, quote, removing all removable aliens in the US by 2012. And so they also change certain policies about what happens while you're waiting for your trial or your immigration hearing. And they started to enforce the borders, really. And largely by borders, I mean the US-Mexico border, right? Because under the early Bush administration, Mexican citizens caught crossing the border illegally were often simply returned or expedited to Mexico without being considered legally detained. And they had sort of different rules about detention and removal depending on who you were, right? If you're non-Mexican migrants, if you're Mexico and Mexican migrants. And we should just asterisk this because this comes back in Trump's immigration and his role of the Border Patrol, especially, he's the first and only president to talk about his wall. So, and it also comes back to what we were talking about today, or like in our current status, right, where you can racially profile. And this is largely directed at Latinx, Hispanic people who are in this country, citizens or not, right? So I think what is somewhat less known in the Bush ICE era is that there was also an immigration reform plan that would have established a guest worker program and provided a clearer path for citizenship for the millions of undocumented immigrants living in the US at the time. But that actually was sort of panned on a bipartisan level because conservatives didn't really like that path to citizenship in the same way. And liberals were kind of like, this guest worker program, is it just going to create a bunch of low paid workers with no social benefits? Like, I mean, probably, right? The US, as we talked about in our book, right? This has been a consistent theme of US immigration policy, especially when it comes to guest workers, right? Or bringing people in for low paid labor. All right. So the Bush ICE theme is counterterrorism, right? Moving forward to Obama. Obama made a lot of promises, right? When he was elected in 2008, promised to reform immigration policy by making the path to citizenship easier for undocumented immigrants. Remember, Bush couldn't do that. Obama wanted to. And by focusing the deportation system on people who are actually considered genuine threats to national security, right? Those are really great goals. Also, and I want to be really fair here because like I am an Obama stan all day. And like under his administration, ICE got a lot more powerful and set in motion kind of like this vast deportation engine that like kind of led us to where we are today, right? Like, I mean, obviously a million times worse, but I think we saw like detention centers grow or the number of detention centers grow. And detention centers can be really problematic because the quality of life in detention centers, right? Who runs detention centers? Is there a private industry now for sort of private prisons? Who makes money off of that, right? So that is a troubling part, ICE, and the growth of our immigration plan, right? But the good news is like, going back to that focus shift, right? Obama had described this shift of his immigration reform plan on prosecuting felons, not families. And I think that most undocumented immigrants, Sarah, to your earlier point, who were apprehended were treated as civil cases and were not subject to criminal prosecution unless they committed a serious crime while in the US. So that while it means that they are penalized, right, they're not criminalized in the same way. Also, under Obama, DACA was created, right? The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which allowed certain people who arrived in the US as children to be granted this renewable 2-year grace period from deportation and become eligible for a work permit. Because I think you've seen also like during that time period, you had a lot of unaccompanied minors coming into the United States. And so the question of children and refugee status was really, really important. Also important because we've seen that try and be reversed in a number of ways. So Obama's was kind of really like a mix between like this really focused on helping people find a legal path to citizenship and removing and really prosecuting felons who were here unlawfully. and kind of expanding ICE.
And I want to just say, for me, this idea of DACA, like the fact that it's still questionable, and I feel like it's not like set in stone. It seems like it might be like, I just think about the humanity of the people who came here as children, some of whom have been here for like 30 years. It'd be like someone saying, hey, Sarah, you should go back to Japan. I mean, granted, I have actually lived in Japan for like, years in my adult life, but it's, when you don't have familiarity, you don't have the social net, you don't have the people, like you spent your life growing up in this country, it feels a little inhumane to be like, go back to this country that you basically don't know anything about other than like, maybe it's on your, like, that's where you originally came from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think like all of this kind of goes back to the humanity behind this, right? Like, how do we look at people, really? How do we value people? Okay, so now we move to the
Wait,
Trump.
I just feel like this is just real crap. Okay. Is anyone else feeling really crappy right now?
Well, then I should just gloss over Trump won, because like, and I think we have documented Trump won on our show pretty extensively, or like Trump 1.0. I don't even know what to call this first, like 4 years of him. But I think like the overarching theme for him, right, is zero tolerance. And this time it's probably white nationalism, but Trump 1.0 is really zero tolerance, because I think we remember his campaign statement, right? When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, like all of that BS that he spewed, and like, kind of won on that because he kind of weaponized what had been put in place by other presidents and was like, you know what? This is a great way to be xenophobic and nationalist. And like, we can just manipulate that, right? Because I think we remember like within that first time period of his, like a week of his inauguration, like he starts issuing executive orders, like he's deporting, all removable aliens. There's sweeping immigration enforcement raids. Like ICE has sort of this like power now in the community that they didn't prior to that.
We touch on Trump 1.0 in our book. Like there's a whole chapter on that in our book, Dear White Women, Let's Get Uncomfortable Talking About Racism, in case you didn't know that we had that out there.
Yeah, and I mean, he was like announcing he would phase out DACA, right? He like, canceled temporary protected status for thousands of refugees, I think, and the travel bans, right? Let's not forget the travel
bans. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Right? Like we've all tried to put that out of our head, but it's back, right? And I think like then, we have Jeff Sessions, like this is just like a parade of terrible people, right? And that's when Jeff Sessions, who was the Attorney General in 2018, directed prosecutors to accept a zero tolerance policy for improper entry into the United States. And so that was a real shift in immigration policy. And
that's when the detention camps, they were set up at the border, the families were being separated. Like it was horrible.
Right. And generally, we used to have a jurisdiction for expedited removal from the country that was kind of 100 miles from the border, right? And Trump was like, you know what, 100 miles not enough. Let's make it nationwide. Let's just do that. And so like, we had more ICE raids, like, I don't know, Trump 1.0, like zero tolerance. Like, and I think with Biden, right, just laughing because there's no good end to this right now, right? Biden tried to reverse a lot of it, right? I think, but we also, I think he faced a lot of criticism. And like, the question was like, there were still deportations going on, right? He had humanitarian parole programs, but like, I think there was also, the question of like, then the borders, there were too many illegal crossings. And like, he was sort of getting skewered from all angles. I don't think he ever really settled on like a comprehensive immigration policy because he was too busy trying to undo and then like trying to deal with an influx of migrants. And so like, this is a no-win situation for him. Then we have the 2024 election and like Trump on the stage, talking about the debunked myth of Haitian immigrants stealing and eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. And it's like we're right back in his Mexican rapist, stage. Like he is once again weaponizing xenophobia, racism to like really hit this nationalism. And now it's a white Christian nationalism platform. Hard, right? I mean, that was completely debunked. He like hung on to that one. And obviously it led to racial tensions, incredibly anti-Haitian, anti-Black sentiments. And he used all of it. He used all of it to win. And I think like, I just want to talk like very briefly on to the people who are listening to this and are like, okay, but like we need to remove illegal immigrants from our country, right? Like they shouldn't be here, especially the violent ones, like because that's what we hear about. And that's what a lot of mainstream news is reporting, right? That we've got this like violent illegal immigrant problem. I think we can all agree that we do not want violent criminals, right, in the country. We're like, we just don't want violent criminals in our communities, period, right? Like, I think we can agree on that. But we have to ask the question, like, what is ICE actually doing, right? Is that what they are doing? Because what we're seeing, right, what we saw we're recording a week after a US citizen was murdered in her car and called a fucking bitch by an ICE agent who was trained to know that what he was doing was illegal and also trained to know, like, training 101, like, never stand in front of a car. Like, that is just basic training, right? And, he basically shot this 37-year-old mom in cold blood because, as some has argued, his ego was offended because her wife called him big boy as they were attempting to avoid confrontation. And her last words to him, in contrast, were, "I'm not mad at you." He murdered her anyway. And maybe it's not as deep as that. Maybe it's just power and how power has been exhibited and okayed in this administration. But I think, as we've noted above, ICE can detain U.S. citizens. They can clearly murder U.S. citizens. We've had, there's been 170 U.S. citizens detained, at least in a count that ProPublica did, because there's obviously, the administration is not releasing any information on this, as of October of last year. So imagine now that we are seeing a ramp up in ICE violence, a ramp up in
their
ICE
budget.
raids. Well, yes. Let's not forget all the money, and I think like what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis, and, we're recording this 2 weeks before this is released. So who knows like what is going to happen now. But, we have a MAGA influencer, a 23-year-old MAGA influencer who was had made some video about Somali-owned daycares, claiming that they were empty, hitting fraud as a result. Those have been debunked, but that was enough, right? You get Fox News to seize on that. You get Trump to seize on that. You have an influx of ICE into Minneapolis, and you have the death of Renee Nicole Good and communities being terrorized. So
I will say one of the things that makes me happier is absolutely not the right word, but like a little bit more relieved that, unlike when we all witnessed the murder of George Floyd and the defense, like the rally cry became, "Oh, but it's one bad apple. The police are all good." Right. I have not once heard that this dude is like, it was just him. He had a bad day. He was dragged in his previous thing, hadn't gotten over his like trauma from that. And so let's just free ICE is still good. Like, it seems to me that there is a large recognition at the dangers of ICE as an organization, and that it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, as opposed to this being a one bad apple kind of case.
Yeah. And I think this is important. And, we talked about
Schmestapo.
Just to hit on this quickly, because I think there is, sometimes a danger in oversimplifying or sort of creating an exact parallel, right, between two different historical situations. However, the history of the Gestapo, and I specifically talking about, and there's a great podcast episode from Behind the Bastards that talks about Heinrich Himmler and the SS for some like really light listening, but they make a great point there that the SA, which was the sort of the precursor to the SS, right? The SA were the ones known as the brown shirts. I'm not even going to try and attempt the German name, but it was created in 1921 by basically disgruntled former German soldiers, right? And the thing about the SA was they were basically like thugs. They wore brown shirts. They were a lot of times like blue collar workers. Like if you picture the Proud Boys, this is the SA, right? Speaking of, where are the Proud Boys now that like the ICE raids have really like gotten, this is very interesting. Proud Boys disappeared, ICE leveled up. Anyway, just musing out loud. But the SA was, not as well educated, very violent. They backed Hitler in this failed coup, right? Does any of this, I mean, I don't know. This just sounds like never seen this one before.
Well, my husband actually pointed out yesterday, like for anybody who's like, well, it's a little far-fetched. I mean, I appreciate your caveat that you can't make an exact parallel, but over the weekend, the U.S. Department of Labor tweeted out, "One homeland, one people, one heritage. Remember who you are, American." And I'm like,
Mm.
that is actually very different than the melting pot of America with many
Right.
heritages. And
That's not the song we sang in school or the poems we memorized. Like,
can we talk about the Third Reich, Nazi Germany's slogan, which translates to one people, one empire, one leader?
hmm.
Like, there's, like, I said something about dog whistle politics and the stuff. Like, they're coming out of hiding right now. Like, that's a very clear parallel, I think. And
Yeah.
so I feel like okay, you're more history dude than, or like person than I am. From the time Hitler got into power until this stuff went down, wasn't it like 3 months? Until, like, it was not a long period of time.
It was short. And what I want to turn this over to you to talk about like what we can do. But I want to make one point is that the essay actually was sort of attacked from within and was disbanded because Heinrich Himmler, who was like sort of one of Hitler's right-hand men, hated that the essay was not educated and not pure, right? Like, and so if we think about like the white Christian nationalism and that language that you just pointed out, right? The SS are also the ones who ran like the concentration camps, right? That was born out of the desire to have a well-educated, very violent, but very pure, like sort of secret police. And so the essay was the first, but it wasn't the last.
Mm.
And so I think when we think about like how this has evolved in the past, when everyone says like it could be worse, like it really could be worse. And so to not understand the history means that we don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
And if we do know where this is going, we have to fight harder to make sure it doesn't happen again. So on that note, Sarah, what can we do?
Well, so before we go to what can we do, if you want to actually feel the impact of what we're talking about and like this idea of, you were talking about like the detention centers and the incarceration and like, I mean, we've talked to people on our show who like Irvin Staub, we have a whole episode. He survived the Holocaust and talks about his family's experience. And I'm so lucky we got to talk to him. We also spoke with John Tateishi, who survived the Japanese American like incarceration camps after World War II in the United States. So you can listen to people who've been through this and understand that the impact is not just being detained. Like there's so much to this psychologically as a culture. Yeah. Please listen to those episodes to put the human voice to these experiences that we're talking about. Obviously not the incarceration camps that we have at the detention centers right now at the border, but maybe we will talk to someone at some stage to bring that to you guys. But it's not, guys, it's not getting better. If we don't do something, it's not like this is the clear trajectory that you're just talking about, right? ICE is now like in Minnesota. It's not the time to give up. We cannot do that because we know based on history where this is going to go if we stop. So thank you again for asking the what can you do? First, I think it's important, and I hope everybody's feeling it. Like we're talking about how this was centered in Minnesota right now, but all it took was one right-wing influencer to like light the spark. And boom, they rushed over there. This could happen to your town. This could happen anywhere in this country at any time. And like this doesn't stop with immigrants or those who just, quote, aren't obeying the law, right? You can argue till you're blue in the face about whether she was obeying the law. Someone else I heard said that that Renee Good shouldn't have been there because she was a mother. Like, are you kidding me right now? Like, you still shouldn't be killed. They're stopping people at will with no regard for citizenship status. Like they're killing U.S. citizens, or they're certainly targeting U.S. citizens as well. So this can be any one of us. There's no space for like wrapping ourselves in a bubble and pretending this isn't happen. So what we're asking is do something. Don't be silent, hold the line, and do more. So I think the thing that I want to suggest is really that it doesn't have to be what everybody else is doing. Like all of the small things matter and your life best. So figure out what works for you, right? Join a community or band together with people that work for you. Pick and choose what works for you so that you can keep going. And so I loosely broke up the what you can do section into 4 categories, and we can talk through some of them. But like one is using your body to show up. Another is using your wallet, like economic power. And a third is using your writing, petitioning, like the stuff you can do from your home virtually if you're connected to the internet. And then the last thing is can be joyful because these are heavy times. And if we don't sustain ourselves, oh my goodness, this is like, we have to be able to make this sustainable. So let's talk about the joy too. I would like to go into the body one first because personally, this is the hardest for me. I don't know about you. I feel like,
Let's do it.
like, okay. So we pulled from a bunch of different resources, but there's an organization, and look for places near you too, called ICOM that gives rides for people vulnerable to ICE enforcement. Like you can basically take them in your car or accompany them to check-ins, and it helps basically provide basic needs. You can also show up and use your body by going to like rallies, right? These are cropping up everywhere. There's stores that people are protesting. There's city council meetings where they're talking about these things. People are showing up. There's ICE facilities, or even I think in our area, they are singing like a Rage Against the Machine song outside the ICE facility at 7 a.m. every day. There's also proposed facilities. Like there's one here in Hudson, Colorado, and they have like rallies called No Concentration Camps in Colorado. Other people literally are creating their own protests and marches locally. So galvanize your area if you don't see one. But going back to like rallies and protests, the reason sometimes showing up in some of these places around courthouses also is important is some immigrants are legally showing up to the court to do what they're supposed to do and like renew or move on with their immigration process, and they are being detained when they're going to do the right thing. So you can protect them in those situations and pressure ICE to back off. Like, are you a rally person, Misasha?
I mean, it depends, right? Like for some of them, no kings, yes. Like local community ones. I'm not sure I'm going up to like the city to go to them.
Yeah.
Though.
No, same. Honestly, I was like, ooh, this is not going to work for my body. But I think like the smaller, different ways that you can show up can be like, go to your county commission meeting, right? Federal governments are cutting money to certain states and certain areas now. So like be there to show up. How are they going to, and like talk to them about what you think the budget should be reconfigured to make up for the federal cuts. And I think like the other thing that people are talking about, since you don't know when this is going to happen, is go to the Know Your Rights training, right? And like you can take part in neighborhood watches. Make sure you have the number to call if you see suspected ICE activity. Order those whistles. I just learned about like the 3 whistles to indicate ICE is there. 1 long whistle to like be like, get out of here if you're potentially going to be targeted. So there are so many ways, I think, to show up in person. Look for your local immigrant right organization. If you want, we'll give you just a moment to add search for immigrant rights organizations in my city to your to-do list for later today. But I think there's a lot you can do in person. So figure that part out. The other part, you and I have talked about voting with your wallet forever.
As well.
Like, let's hit them where it freaking hurts, right? Like, go after corporate collaborators. Everybody, all of this is about money and power. So, for example, there was a company called Avelo, I don't know how to say it, Airlines, but they were running deportation charter flights, and there was enough pressure where they stopped running them. Now there's another organization here in Colorado called Key Lime Air. I can give you the names of all of their major executives. We can pressure them to stop deportation fights because like we're not going to support them otherwise, right? Other pressure in terms of hitting them where it hurts. I think local communities in Minnesota stopped a Hilton affiliate from renting rooms to ICE agents. Yeah. So you can replicate that in any city or town, like tap into the hospitality unions, but like hit them where it hurts, right? There's also like you can use like petitions, social media call outs, 1-day boycotts. Like if you work for an organization that has ties with ICE, you can organize sick outs. Like you can make a difference for organizations like that. I found in The Nation, there was an article, which we can link to in our show notes, but there are companies that might succumb to more pressure. There's, for example, some companies have contracts that expire in March of 2026 with ICE, like Dell, UPS, and FedEx. Other people have organizations or like ties with them like Motorola, Comcast, AT&T, like there's a whole list organizations that are out there. Set up anonymous tip lines for, organizations that also have like ICE ties. And obviously, if you have any extra money that you can use, donate them to causes and organizations and people who are doing the work. And then the virtual power, the last little bit here is like, write and call your legislators. ICE has a huge budget. Talk about that. Get behind your attorneys general when they sue the Trump administration. Talk with your neighbors and friends and keep going with all of the pressure that you can send from your living room. Find joy through all of this. Red Wine and Blue, we just sat in on a conference call with them. Actively write postcards with friends. Do whatever you can. So if you see or hear of an organization that's starting to work on a national campaign also for a coordinated day of nonviolent disruption, let us know. And if you feel like you just want to do something, anything to make this better, even from far away, helping these groups do that work is the thing. We will list so many more resources in our show notes. Check it out. Pick one, pick three, donate what you can. Spread these resources widely. Do you have a quote you want to finish this up with?
Remembering today that having your heart broken is a necessary step on the path to becoming fully human. Whichever heartbreak is your first, it's probably critical that a state break your heart so that you can develop a political imagination. If this is your first, I'm sorry, and also, welcome. This is by Tressie McMillan Cotton.
So let us know what you're doing. You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.